Good morning. We are live for our class today, and we're going to be taking a look at forward folds, specifically in Uttanasana. So last week we worked on seated forward folds, and today we'll take a look at Uttanasana, which is a standing forward fold, if that makes sense. Okay. And so, what we're going to take a look at is we have 30 minutes. So we'll look at a certain aspect of Uttanasana, which is the inward rotation of the thighs, and then how that works with the lower back and how to fold forward like that. So there's also a video that I posted about working with knee pain. And there's been a couple of questions on how to understand that better. And so we're just going to look at the very basics of tucking and untucking. And hopefully then when you rewatch that video, the knee video, that becomes a little bit more clear. And then you can also ask questions about it if you'd like. So we're going to get started and go through these concepts. And I think it'll be a pretty fun class. Okay. Okay. So let's get started by just taking a comfortable position. And if you want to sit on the chair, that's fine. Or if you're sitting in a place where you can sit up straight, meaning if sitting on the floor causes your lower back to round, then sit on a block so that you can lift the chest and breathe freely. So any movement that's going to constrict your breath, then you should take a look at that movement and use support or change the position. Okay, so we are going to start out by just closing our eyes, lifting the chest, that inner lift of the chest, and softening the eyes, the ears, and the throat. And then take one more breath. And as you inhale, exhale, release any tension you feel in the eyes, the ears, the throat. And throughout your practice, keep this sensation of release, of keeping that softness in the eyes, the ears, and the throat so that you're not accumulating any more tension as you practice. So the practice of yoga is really a great practice to work on the mind versus just gain strength and flexibility in the body, which are great things, but also you're really working on, so many other things, but start by this release of the eyes, the ears, and the throat. Okay, so taking a look at our forward fold today, we're going to first start out with this movement of the hips and what it means to tuck and untuck in this forward fold pose. Okay, so first thing that's very important, we're going to take a look at this area here, and it'll be, I'll call this the sacrum, and these the hip bones. So these are, we're going to stay away from the terminology that you can use in a doctor's office, or you can use more formally, and we're just going to use terms that make sense to the practice. Okay, so these I'll call the hip bones. So it's the bony area here where your hip bones are, and here is the sacrum. So when I start thinking about rotating the thigh inward and tucking and untucking, whatever it may be, I want to make sure that in my poses I have the sensation that my sacrum is wide. And what I mean by that, if you grab your hands and you do this with your hands and you put your fingers here, okay, and we're going to have this feel that the hip bones are rolling into each one another, but they're creating this sensation. So it's very important to do this with our hands because in the beginning, it's all that we can do. We can say, okay, I want to create the widening sensation in the sacrum as opposed to this jamming. So there can be in certain poses when if we make the mistake of maybe bringing the hip, I'll show you in Trikonasana, you can cause this jam on the sacrum, and that's never a good idea. There are so many different, little tiny spaces and nerves. You don't want to jam the sacrum. So we create the sensation of creating this sensation of wide space in the sacrum. So if you could do this with your hands, roll the hip bones into one another. This is what I mean. Okay, so we can do this standing up here. So if I come to a standing, I make the sacrum wide. So here, place the feet on the mat, spread the toes, make the legs very active, and that means, hug the muscle to the bone and then bring the kneecaps up. So kneecaps up, legs are firm, and then I am learning this idea of keeping a wide space in the sacrum behind. Okay, so here, lift the chest, soft eyes, ears, throat, breathe, lift the chest, wide sacrum. Okay, after we start understanding this, and we understand this through time, or every pose we remember that there's always going to be a wide space in the sacrum versus a sacrum jam. So if I'm in this position here, if I'm in Trikonasana, and here, if I bring this hip back, I might cause a jamming here. So here I'm always thinking of rolling the hip bones into one another, creating a wide space in the sacrum here. Okay. So wide space in the sacrum, don't ever forget that. That's a foundational concept. So always keep that one in mind. So second, we're going to look at tucking and untucking. So first, let's get comfortable with the terminology. So tucking is going to be, so it's never in action where you're overdoing this and hurting your back. So if I'm tucking so much that I cannot breathe, or that I feel like I'm causing different cramps, then that's too much. Or if I'm untucking in a way that's causing so much of a back bend because I have a flexible back that it constricts the breathing, or it's causing other damage, then that's too much. So if you look at the normal curve of the back, there's a normal curve there in the sacrum. So if I'm tucking, I'm just it's more of a movement of my hip, and it causes a little bit more of a flattening in the back, but it's not to say that I'm flattening my back to the point where I'm injuring the back or the parts around there. Same thing with untucking, you're going to be creating a little bit of an arch. That is, if your back tends to flatten more when it's, then you create the tucking. So this is just to say you're not, overarching or over flattening the back on these actions at all. You're just watching for that place where you have your normal curve there, and you're just working with that. So if I show it to you on the floor here, a good way to remember is this is my pubic symphysis in the front. And if I am tucking, I'm sort of, it feels like I'm flattening the back because I am rotating my hips so that the pubic symphysis comes up. Okay, so this is it laying down, and then we're going to have to learn it standing up also. So tucking, I'm tucking under, like tucking the sheets around the mattress or whatever it is, tucking. And then untucking, it's bringing the pubic symphysis down towards the floor. So here is the pubic symphysis coming down towards the floor and creating an arch because I tucked. So I rotated the hips around the head of the femur in this way, right? Bringing the hip bones up. And here I rotate my hips around the head of the femur this way. So this is tuck and untuck. So you can practice this and just slowly, connect the word to the action. So tuck and untuck. Okay? Untuck. If you remember one of them, then the other one comes easy. So untuck is where you create an arch, not because you're creating an arch, but because you're rotating the hips around the head of the femur so that this pubic symphysis goes down to the floor and the hip bones come up. Okay, so tuck and untuck. So take a few minutes and just get familiar with those. So now okay, so we'll go here a little bit further. So here I am tucking, right? So tucking is gonna look like this. The pubic symphysis is gonna come forward. So tucking, and it creates a little bit of a, right, a tucked position. Okay, and here is untucking, right? Creates more of an arched position. Okay, tucking, untucking. Once we're familiar with that, then we're going to look at something different. Certain poses are going to require an inner rotation of the thigh. So inner rotation of the thigh is the thigh rotating in. So, the back of the thigh comes in, right? So inner rotation, this motion. So if you can grab your hands and just mimic that inner rotation of the thigh, okay? What's going to happen when we rotate in, our sit bones are going to come out and we're going to untuck. Right, so rotate in, I'm gonna untuck. If you rotate the thighs out, okay, you rotate the thighs out, you're going to tuck. So rotate the thighs out, it's just gonna tuck the pelvis a little bit more. Okay, so rotate the thighs in, you're going to move these sit bones a little bit away from each other because of the rotation. And you're going to arch the back. And if you rotate the thighs out, it will untuck. It will tuck your pelvis. Okay, so inner rotation untucks the pelvis. Outer rotation will tuck the pelvis. Okay, so tucking, remember, is this rotation here where the pubic symphysis come forward, and outer rotation of the thighs will tuck. Okay. Now, inner rotation of the thigh will untuck your pelvis. And if there's a lot of tightness in the hips and a lot of tightness in the quads and in the hamstrings, it is difficult to feel this tuck and untuck and how the rotations affect. So in the beginning, just start seeing what you can sense. So if you stand up and you turn the legs out, so you turn the top of the thighs away from each other, see that there's a little bit of a tuck, a flattening of the back. If you rotate the thighs in towards one another, there's a little bit of untucking, a little arch that happens. So different poses have this different actions of tucking and untucking. So if I do this pose, triangle pose or Trikonasana, what I'm doing here is I am rotating the legs out, and that's gonna, and I have to tuck here. And of course, make sure that I'm keeping that wide space in the sacrum. So these hip bones will go towards each other, legs out, and the hip tucks. If I have a lot of tightness in my hamstrings, it's going to be really hard to tuck. So we just have to work on the hamstrings, and then the tucking comes. So it's hard to feel, but here I can untuck here. That's incorrect in this pose. If I tuck, make sure that I'm not bringing the hip bones back to tuck, that I'm keeping these guys, right? So I don't jam the back, and then leg rotates out and tuck. So it's something that in the beginning, I just, take note of and see what I can sense. Even if it's one fiber movement that I can sense, that's great. And as I gain more flexibility in the hips, I can feel this tucking and untucking better. So for our pose of the day, which was Uttanasana, in Uttanasana, we're going to turn the thighs in. So here, if you try to turn you would never, you would not try turn the feet out unless you're doing some kind of therapeutic work. But if you're turning the feet out, you're turning the thighs out and you're tucking, and then you try to bend forward here, it's not going to work, right? This is tucked. It has to untuck. I'm not saying you have to overly arch your back. It's just the movement of the legs where you rotate the thighs in, and then you have this untucking of the pelvis, right? So pubic, almost causing a little lower back bend here. And you really have the length of your hamstring, and you're untucking, and then you have that room and space to come down. Okay, so you have to turn these, the top of the femur rotate in. All right, and you come down into the pose, keeping that space in the sacrum. So there's all the different steps to the pose. So hopefully that wasn't way too confusing. So first, maybe rewatch the part of the video where you start learning what is tuck and untuck. So what is the movement of the hips around the head of the femur? So tucking and untucking. Then you start understanding what that feels in your body. So when you tuck, what happens to your lower back? What happens to the hips? And which muscles are preventing you from doing that? So probably hamstrings, so lots of virasana. Quads, lots of virasana, hamstrings, the video that we did yesterday. And you start feeling, what starts happening in the pose. And then the inner rotation of the top of the femur versus outer rotation of the top of the femur. And then that's all, of course, it's going to be very difficult in the beginning to feel that. So it just becomes very kind of, just bookish knowledge. And so the more that you think about this and get familiar with the terminology, is just pointing to something that's happening. And then you can actually, after working at it for a while, you can feel it. So let's look at Uttanasana, and let's look at some subtle things that you can work with in Uttanasana and what it means. This video that we are all watching and asking questions about, where you are laying on the floor and you're rotating the legs out, and then feeling that the back flattens, right? And then we're doing this thing called the double action, where we give the back a little arch. And we're going to do the opposite of that in Uttanasana right now. So let me show you what that means. So first, if you take a look at this body here that I can show you, you'll see, hopefully I can show you how this helps the pose. So I'm going to use a chair if I need to. So if I don't have enough length on my hamstrings, which is, okay, so here we go. So I'm here in Uttanasana, and what do I have to do first is, I'm not going to worry about the knees, but the knees should be just facing forward. Okay, and I want to really make sure that the leg is very, very long. So if I'm bending the knees, then I work on the hamstrings first. Once I can keep the knees very, very straight, or I come to the place where I keep the knees very straight, I want to stretch the back of the legs. And what I want to do first is make sure that I stamp on the outer heel of my foot. So I stamp on the outer heel so I can bring the femurs away from each other. So if you sit here on your chair and you bring the femurs away from each other, I don't want to dislocate my femur. So please understand, this is just to create space in the sacrum here. Okay, so I'm going to start by creating that space. So I want to stamp on the outer heels, bring the femurs away from each other. Okay, so pretend that my leg is doing this here, right? So I'm bringing the femur away from each other. Okay. So I'm going to do this a few times. Stamp on the outer heels of the foot. And I don't need to lift my toe or anything, but I put my weight here on the outer part of the foot. And I'm going to separate the femurs away from each other, the head of the femur. Okay, second step, I'm going to access this part of my hamstring here, the last little few inches as it connects to my sit bone. So this, if you have a hamstring that's hurting or injured, be very careful, or maybe work towards healing that hamstring. So do this part very carefully, because this is sometimes the tightest part of the hamstring, and you don't want to injure it. But I'll show you what that looks like with the belt. So you tie a belt like this. Okay, put the belt here around. And this you do very, very gently, and definitely don't let anybody else other than a very experienced teacher do this adjustment for you, because you can really hurt your hamstring. So it's coming through the bottom like this. So I'm here, right? So you're not tucking here. You're gonna allow yourself to untuck just a little bit, come down, and you're gonna put this belt it's underneath the glutes there, and you're going to stretch that last little part of the hamstring up. So you should be able to, without a belt, you can't get this kind of effect, but you look for that effect to really lengthen the hamstring, untuck the pelvis, and then that allows the back to just come forward. Right, so I don't have this curving of the back here. I'm just the normal shape of my back, and making my legs very active, working this last part of my hamstring, and then I can just almost melt forward. All right, so have untucking of the pelvis, stamping through the outer heels. Then I maintain this wideness in the sacrum by stamping on the outer heels, bringing the heads of the femur away from each other. All right, and then making the legs very active. Legs are very, very, very straight. Kneecaps coming up. And then I work on recreating the effect that I did with the belt. And by the way, you can do this, you can use the same belt when you're sitting down and doing Parsvakonasana. And then you start coming down, untucking the pelvis, allowing this curve here to give you a better sense of breathing here, so you're not holding the breath. And then again, inward rotation of the head of the femur, stamping on the outer heel, rotating the top of the femur in. When you do that, you bring the sit bones a little further away from each other, and you give yourself more room to untuck the pelvis and to come forward. And so here you see right here, I could release a little bit more. That'll require more opening of the back of my legs. Right, so here we go, stamp on the outer heel, really lift the leg, make this leg very active, very, very, very straight. Lift here through the very end here of without injuring yourself. So go very slow here, right? And then untuck the pelvis, release the belly, breathe, lift the chest, lift to the sides of the body here, so that you're not getting this energy here. You're releasing, and it's almost like a back bend and a forward bend. Right, so going from this to really working the legs and then freeing the upper body. Right, and the nice thing is that there's always more work that we can do, more lengthening of the leg and more lengthening of the body, and creating a place in this pose where we can really let the breath flow, let the energy flow, so it's not stagnant or gripping in any part of the pose. So I hope this helps with understanding this part of Uttanasana. And for the last 5 minutes of the pose, I can show you once you start having this terminology pretty clear about tucking and untucking, and when you rotate the thighs in, you're going to untuck. When you rotate the thighs out, or the top of the femur out, you're going to tuck or flatten the back a little bit more. Then once you watch the video, it's going to be asking for you to do the opposite. And this is very particular to one student. And so it's done to help that one student because something was seen on that one student. So when you watch that video, just remember when you rotate the legs in, you're going to untuck the pelvis a little bit. When you rotate the legs out, you're going to flatten the back or tuck. Okay, and then you can hopefully follow those instructions better. So I'll show you in Uttanasana what happens. This is after you practice this, making sure that the legs are very straight, that you lengthen the back of the leg as much as you can, you untuck the pelvis, and then there is a sense where the tailbone comes forward. It's not a tucking, it's like an internal release. So it's not something that you do, it just releases. And that is, maybe a more refined step for Uttanasana. I don't know if I can demonstrate it and have you be able to see it. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. But if I do it on Uttanasana and I make my legs very, very active, I stamp through the outer heels. I widen the sacrum by bringing the femurs away from each other, so towards the outside. Okay, I make sure that the hip bones are coming in towards one another, again, widening the sacrum, so creating space. Then I untuck and untuck and untuck and untuck and come forward. And then I create this length here on the top of my hamstring. Okay, and so I am untucked, creating that back bend. My legs are working. Okay, and I could release here more, and this will come with time. All right, so release, untuck, and then sometimes there's a adjustment where you put the hand here and you just push it down, almost as if, but you don't want to tuck here. You want to maintain this untucked position as long as you're not, overdoing and hurting this area. So you're keeping the leg very active. And here, it's almost as if you could release the tailbone forward. So allow it to just release forward. So you're not pushing it forward. You're still maintaining without losing the integrity of the legs, without losing this untucked position and the normal curve of the back here. Releasing the back, almost doing a back bend in a forward bend. Then release the eyes, the ears, and the throat. Release any tension in the belly, any gripping. And once you're ready, you can sort of release any kind of gripping in the pelvis here and allow that tailbone to just come forward. All right. So if you're able to work there and feel that release of the tailbone, then you can start exploring that, but really making sure that the eyes, the ears, and the throat are soft and without any tension while you're doing that, and allow that length in the chest so that when you receive the tailbone coming forward, you can receive that lift in the chest in a forward bend. And there's just endless things that you can do working on Uttanasana. That is just really nice. So, all right. So I hope that this was helpful, and let me know if there's any questions, and I will see you next week. Thank you.